This is a common question whenever we have these episodes. Morgan WF says, how do you differentiate mental issues such as anxiety and depression from spiritual attacks?
Yeah, I think it's tough, man. That's a really difficult, it's really hard, I think. And it's hard for a couple of reasons. One, because we're a hylomorphic unity. We're a body-soul composite, right? And so when you have psychological issues, that can have spiritual consequences. And when you're having spiritual issues, there can be psychological consequences. And so there is this sort of difficulty in trying to get really, really clear on it. But for me, generally speaking, I would say something like cause and treatment. So something like, what is this arising from? Is this arising from like habitual sin or some sort of sinful, immoral behavior? Did that precede the problem? Now, again, that's not super clear, because sometimes even our sinful behavior can be driven by emotional pain, psychological pain, trauma that we've experienced, right? So, but generally I'm looking at what's the immediate or sort of antecedent cause. Was there some sort of immorality? And then I'm looking at what things are helping. Is prayer helping? Are the sacraments helping? And if not, then I think maybe taking a psychological route can be helpful. I'll give you my principle. And this was affirmed for me by a very, I think, holy, retired old bishop who was a dear friend. I tend to start with the natural. Like just go in the natural door first. And then if that doesn't seem to be bearing fruit, then the supernatural may be worth paying attention to. Sometimes in very religious community, this isn't to deny the spiritual dimension at all, because I also think that the fullness of healing requires a spiritual component or dimension. But I do think it's important to sort of recognize that oftentimes in very religious sort of circles, we tend to put things in terms that we're comfortable with. And so there's a real temptation to take psychological issues and put them in spiritual language, because that's where we feel comfortable, that's where we feel safe, that's what we feel familiar with. And there's actually a term called spiritual bypass, which is when, rather than looking at difficult, painful psychological things, we translate it into spiritual terms, because that allows us to avoid the painful psychological issues. So as a psychologist, I want to be looking for that. Is this person sort of just spiritualizing this because they're avoiding the deep emotional pain and suffering or memories? But I don't ever want to shy away from ultimately paying attention to the spiritual realm as well, because we're a body-soul composite. But it's tricky. And in some ways, I think paying attention to the spiritual gives you an inroad to the psychological, and paying attention to the psychological can give you an inroad to the spiritual. It requires tremendous prudence. And then I'll stop rambling, but I think it requires tremendous prudence on the part of the therapist, because the lines aren't always bright where one begins and the other ends. Prudence and wisdom. And so having your own prayer life and being comfortable generally discussing both, and not feeling like you have to go in one door or the other, but really seeing what is the person in front of you saying, what are their struggles, is there any avoidance at play? Maybe they're not ready to go in this psychological door yet, so you can start talking about the spiritual stuff. But I don't know. I also think too, when it gets into like spiritual attack and that stuff, that stuff's hard. I don't know.
It's also a difficult question to answer when you don't know this person.
There's so many
general answer to a general question.
Yeah,
I think that's good advice.
We can be tempted, and Satan can use even psychological things to tempt us. And so by addressing some of our psychological wounds, I think we remove the fodder that Satan has to tempt us sometimes, but also maybe prayers of deliverance would be helpful too. So I think it's a really tough one, but prudence, wisdom go a long way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe or you're a dingus. What's a dingus exactly?
Used to refer to something one cannot or does not wish to name specifically.
You don't have to subscribe, but if you did, I'd love it. You dingus.
Like the video. That's who we're using that one. Take one.